So, just to give you a little insight on what we need to do. So when you go out and buy a new PLC, the first thing you're going to have to do is figure out how you're going to communicate with it, right? And it's not, and some PLCs have multiple methods of communication. Since Allen Bradley has been around for a really, really long time, and it's seen a lot of other manufacturers come and go. It has several methods that we can communicate with their different PLCs. And the setup, or how you set up the communication with an Allen Bradley PLC, has not changed in a long, long time. So what we're using is what we call a DH485, which originally connected through one of our computers. So when you bought a computer, you had what we call a COM port, which is a serial port. And originally it was a 25 pin connector, but over time they dropped it down to a 9 pin connector because they realized they didn't need all those channels. And the 9 pin connector, don't take it apart, but that's this guy right here. And it's what we call a DIN connector, which means the male is inside a metal shell, and then the female is in the same direction. So it's what we call a Murphy-proof connector, which means you can't do what? You can't plug it in back. You can rewire it wrong, but you can't plug that connector in backwards. So Murphy's Law says if anything can go wrong, it what? It will, right? So this port right here, we used to have two of them on the back of computers. It was standard. And if you needed more, and originally we could have up to 4 of these things inside our computer. And what we had to do is we had switches on the board that we plugged into the expansion slot, and we had to select the address. This is before Windows XP came out, which is what we call a PNP, or plug-and-play operating system, which allows the operating system to set the address. So that's what we have. That's what we have now. So since DH485 uses this port has disappeared, but does it mean you can't get it? No, it's just you have to buy this dongle thing right here. So you can get those at Amazon. I don't know. These come from Allen Bradley, and we use one of our USB ports. So there's probably, USB ports are just about on every laptop or tablet that you have, not on tablets, but on every laptop that you have out there, and also desktops that comes with probably at least 4 or more USB ports. So what we do is we have a dongle out here that takes USB signals and converts it over to the ORS-232 or the COM port. That makes sense? Okay, so that's what that's for. Now the problem is the PLC does not support the PLC, the computer does not have the driver for this. So what does that mean? It means I have to install it. So when you buy this, it comes with this little mini DVD or CD that I have to install this with. And most of your PLC operating systems comes on either DVDs or CDs, and guess what's disappeared from most of your laptops now? Most of them don't have DVD drives on. So what can you buy? You can buy this, right? You understand? It runs off USB, so you probably have to get one of these. So my computer right here don't have a driver with it. So I plug it in, it comes up and says it needs to install the driver. I have my USB drive plugged in there. I plug it in and it installs the driver. Then it goes into PNP. So what it does, it comes up and it assigns it a COM port. So one of the main things that we use in these things is we use something called Device Manager. Have you ever used that before? Device Manager. And what Device Manager does, it shows you all of the devices that are controlled, that the operating system is controlling with the driver. And what it does now is if you look before you install that driver, you have no COM ports. But right now, it comes up, once I install the driver and everything, it says I have a COM port, right? You see that. So I'm going to see, okay, which COM port did he assign it to? Originally, we could only have 4, but now we can have a ton of them. So I'll go over here and it says my computer or my operating system assigned it to COM 1, 8. So I got to figure that out. It's different on y'all's. For some reason, y'all's was either 3 or 4. So if you go into Device Manager and look under there, you'll see that COM port. So I had to know that. Then what you have to do, and this is true on all Allen Bradley PLCs, is we have to run a program. So inside our manager, our program manager, we have a folder over here called RS Logic Rockwell Software. We click on that one and we run a program called RS Links. And this would be today, if you go out and buy a new Allen Bradley PLC, this is the first thing you're going to have to do. So I'm going to click on this, and it's called RS Links Classic. So I click on Classic. Okay. And then this is going to load in a minute. So this is Allen Bradley PLC. So to install a new PLC, this is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to go through this. Okay, and then what? Then I would go to communication, and it says configure driver. What's a driver? That's a piece of machine language program that controls. So a driver is a little module that's designed or written to control a piece of hardware. So an operating system has 1,000 drivers in there, but it can't support everything. So every once in a while, you plug a new USB device on there, a little gray box pops up on the bottom side and say, it usually says installing software. Sometimes it says installing driver. So what it's doing is adding the driver to your operating system. So I'll configure drivers, and we're using the DFI DH485 running on COM port 8. Now, you got to know the COM port because I'll show you this. So on COM ports, you would have to know the speed. You would have to know if she's using parity. You have to know if she's using cycle redundancy checking. You have to know the number of stop bits. You have to know if it's going to full duplex or half duplex. But you don't really need to know that because you got this thing down here called what? Auto configure. All you got to do is come up here once you go to the device manager and find out what COM port you got it on. Just select the COM port and come down here and hit auto configure, and that's all it is. So it automatically set all that stuff that I don't understand up there, right? Well, I understand it, but y'all don't. Okay? Okay. So now we're configured. So now what I can do under RS Links is I can come over here and check communication. In fact, we don't have to do that. We can use this. And then I can look at that, and there's my PLC there. So it not only did it find it, but it shows me that it's found it, right? So that's what I had to do what? Set up the communication with this PLC. Now, if you look on the left-hand side of your PLC, you see there's another connector there. Anybody know what that connector is? Is that above the DH485 connector? Technically, we call it Ethernet IP. So I have two options. I can interface with this thing with Ethernet, or I can interface with it with DH485. DH485 is a lot more popular. Well, it's not. It's easy for us to set up. For one thing, we hadn't bought batteries for these things in years, and if we turned it off, it would lose its IP address. Anybody know what the IP address? An IP address is? Usually it's totally transparent to you. So everything we communicate out there on the internet, or it has to have some type of address. And it can't have, technically, we don't want it to have a physical address. We want it to have a logical address, which means we can assign it. Well, an IP address, on private networks, we use what we call IPv4, which is a 32-bit number. So an IP address, some people call it a dotted quad, and it starts off with, and it gives it to you in decimal, even though it's 32 bits, it gives it to you in decimal. I don't know why it didn't come up there. So IP address might be like a private address. These are not allowed out on the internet. So mostly, if you're inside a company, it's running what they call a private network. So that means we use private IP. A private IP, if it ever gets out on the internet somewhere, it's just dropped. So legal IP addresses on the internet are different from what we call IP addresses for a private network. So ours will start off with like 192.168.254.10. And these are actually binary numbers, so you'll never see a number above 255 because that's the biggest number you can represent with 8 bits. Okay, so that's the IP address, but it's a logical address, which means it has the ability to change. So most people, when they come up here, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into control panel, which is a very important thing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my network. Oops, it jumped right before I clicked on it. And then I'm going to go to change adapter settings, and then I'm going to find my local area network. Sorry, I'll look at my wireless first. And so inside we're using TCP/IP. Oops. Oops. Sorry. Here we go. Properties and TCP/IP version 4. And then I've got mine set up to do what? Create an IP address automatically. So what we have is we have what we call Dynamic Host Configuration Protocols, or DHCP servers. If you set up it to automatically assign it, then as soon as you turn your computer on, it goes out there and says, I need an IP address. And it goes to the DHCP server, and the DHCP server assigns the address for you. Okay. But this other one says, use the following IP. We call this static IP. If I set it up for static IP, then I have to assign it. Everybody okay? And you have to assign it to match your network. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to look at my my port. This is my unplugged. And then I'm going to come up here and look and see version 4. And it's not there. I'll have to do something. Okay. So the IP address is a logical address that we can assign. Everybody okay there? That makes sense. Now, the device, and you can see this on your phone sometimes, has what they call a medium access control. Or we call it a MAC address. This is the physical address of the network card. This is physical. This is put in there by the manufacturer. You cannot change that. This is like your house address. So once they build your house and they put it on a lot, it's assigned an address, and you can't do what? You can't change it. Now, I can access you different ways, right? You understand. But you can't change your street address. So the MAC address is built into the device. So if I was going to use this interface, what I'd have to do is I'd have to know the MAC address of this piece of PLC. A lot of times they'll write it on the label on the side of the PLC, but let me find my camera. This one don't do that. So I'm gonna try to get my camera to zoom in. And they're not gonna give me, so the MAC address is a 48-bit number. And they're not gonna give it to you in bits, they're gonna give it to you in hex, right? You understand that? Make it easy for us. So what I'm gonna do, I don't know if y'all can read this or not, let's find it where it don't pick up the glove. So I'm gonna come up here, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna go to programs, I'm gonna go back to the Rockwell software, and there it is. There's the DHCP tool right there. And then I'm going to come up here and do that. Now what you have to do is you have to select the actual port or the actual driver. So we're using this gigabit network connection. I'm going to click on that. And now it's sitting there asking for this stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unplug my PLC. Make it ask for it. Okay. And what we're looking for is we're looking for that MAC address to pop up here. So 0F, I know it's 0F. And then eventually it will, hopefully. Are we okay so far? So this is what I have to go through. And this is also true on a brand new L24 3s that we have out there. I have to go through the same thing. I have to assign it an IP address. Luckily, that has two ways of communication too, and it didn't ask for one. Okay. Now I have to put it on the same network as the network card in my computer. So this we have to run what we call command prompt. By the way, this is what we used to have on our computers. This right here. So when the IBM PC first came out, this is what you saw. And you had to learn all these commands, and not only did you have to learn the commands, you had to do what? You had to learn the syntax for the command. So thank goodness for GUI interfaces, for graphical user interfaces, where we can point and click and everything now, right? But this is still so popular, and it's still available even on Windows 10, and it'll be in Windows 11, because this is what we use to configure these Ethernet, or see what's going on with our Ethernet input. And so the main command is ipconfig. And then I'm going to come up here and put a space and put all. And what this is going to do, this is going to show me everything inside this computer that deals with IP address. So here's my, so there's my wireless. So my wireless is set up for dynamic IP. So the college has a DHCP server. As soon as my wireless hits the access point, it comes up and says, where's the DHCP server at, right? It sends out a command and it assigns this IP address. Here's the Bluetooth. So Bluetooth gets IP addresses, by the way. That's my wireless. Here's my local area network, Ethernet adapter. So it don't look like so it don't look like it's got an IP address either. Let's see if our DHCP server asks it for it. Oh. Let's go there together. Guess what I don't have? So this is an Ethernet cable. I don't have my cable here. So this is the Ethernet cable. This is called an RJ45 connector, very similar to the connectors we have on our phones. If you have a phone, still have a phone at house, you still do that way. And we have a wiring scheme here. And I'm looking at the first two colors. Can y'all see the orange on the left-hand side? This is what we call a straight-through cable. So we have two devices on a Ethernet network. We have what we call data terminal equipment. These are your computers and your printers. So these are what's designed to receive and transmit data. And then we have data communication equipment. This is what data flows through to get between DTEs. So if I go from a DTE to a DCE, I use what we call a straight-through cable. If I go from two DTEs, then I got to use what we call a crossover cable. So if I look at this guy right here, you notice this guy's got orange on the left. So look at this guy over here, it's got what, green. So this is a crossover cable. So the computer, the PLC thinks this is a DTE. The computer thinks this is a DTE. So what have I got to do to hook it up? I just can't go get an Ethernet cable. I have to get what we call a crossover cable. If you take PLC 3, guys, you're going to make your own what? You're going to make your own cable. So I'm going to plug this in. So my PLC for now this is basically what you'll need to go through. So ever since the 1100, every Allen Bradley PLC has Ethernet connections on it. It's really neat. The Compact Logic L24s actually has a network switch on it. It's got a DCE on it, so on that you'd use a straight through cable. So let's bring up my DHCP server again. So I'll get it up there in a minute. And there it is up there. So 000F, that's my PLC. Okay, so I'm going to come up here and double click on that. So let me do this again. So as soon as I did the DHCP server, this guy asked for an IP address. And can you see the IP address is assigned at 169.254.163. This is what I got. I want all these to be the same. Then what I'm going to do is change this one right here. So I'm going to come up here, click on this guy. It brings this up. I'm going to come up here, and what am I going to say? I'm going to say 169. And if you enter 3 characters, it automatically moves over, by the way. And then, where am I at, Rich? 254.163. And then I got to assign this a different IP address. So I'm going to do 200. Okay. Now, when Siemens did their new application called TIA Portal, Total Integrated Automation, this is so much easier. I mean, this is so much easier because it only uses Ethernet IP or Profinet. Siemens calls it Profinet. So that means I don't have to. So you can see now it's assigned it. So if I come back over to my PLC, I don't run my battery now. And then I take it through. Take it through our steps that we looked at before. So, okay. Okay. Now I go down, advanced, okay. I go down, I go to Ethernet, I go to okay. And you can see now it shows me so now it's got an IP address. So now what I would have to do, so this is what you have to do with Allen Bradley PLCs, guys. if you get a new PLC. Now, hopefully they've kept batteries changed in them, and the network guys come up and done what? Assigned this for you. But if it's not, and you're the person, then you're going to have to do this. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to bring up RS Links again. Okay, so notice now I don't have my computer on the DH485. I'm going to come over here and look at Ethernet. And there it is. So there's my PLC. So now I can communicate it with Ethernet, right? Does that make sense? By the way, once you create a program, the way you communicate with the program is saved with the program. So what that means, if you create the program using a COM port, and then you switch over to the Ethernet port, then that other program won't load. It'll come up and say it has a configuration problem, but you can change that. If we get time, I'll show you that, where you can actually go into the settings of the program and switch over which way you communicate with. So that's what we have to do for Ethernet. Ethernet, we got to do what? We got to find out what the MAC address is for the PLC. So if you look at the L24s that we have, it's got the MAC address on it. This one you got to go through those menus and find the MAC address. Your iPhone. Normally, if you go into information about your iPhone, it's got if it can connect to the internet, it's got a what? It's got a MAC address. So that MAC address was put in there by Apple when it did what? When it made the phone. So MAC addresses can't be changed. That's like your house address. Once they build that address on that lot, you're what? It's a physical address. Our phone numbers used to be physical. They were actually hardwired. Our phone numbers were hardwired, but now they're not anymore. Our phone like we went from hardwired phones, our house phone, over to voice over IP over the internet, and we got the same number. So we had to call AT&T and have them take us off the hardwired and move us over to Spectrum, which is our phone is now. And we kept ours because that's the phone number that we've given out for years, right? So if we did away with our house phone, then there's a lot of people that wouldn't even know how to get in touch with us. So now I could create a program, and we would see it over there. So this is two methods we can communicate with this PLC. We can use DH485. We like to use that because, like I said, we don't have batteries in these PLCs. And this is not kept in ROMs or anything. It's not there. So or flash memory. So what it means, if I unplug this PLC, I lose my MAC address. I mean, I don't lose my MAC address. I lose my what? IP address. But DH485 is not a network interface. I can't hook multiple. It's what we call a peer-to-peer network, which means it's set up to hook one computer to what? To one computer. So that way, if we turn our PLC off, the DH485 would still work. But Ethernet, I'd have to go through all this again unless I buy batteries for these things. Does that make sense? But if we had the L24s out here, we'd have to go through all this right here to set up the Ethernet interface. So communication with a PLC, a new PLC, that's the first thing you have to do. If you can't communicate with it, you can't what? You can't program it, right? You can't change the program. You can't access it. You can't use it to troubleshoot. And we'll show y'all, we have quite a few troubleshooting tools with the PLC. So DHCP, that's Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, that's a computer that assigns what we call dynamic IP. Static IPs, so I've got a file server over there. Does it use a dynamic IP or a static IP? Well, a file server, we don't want it moving around, right? You understand that? So those are set up for, usually file servers are set up for static IPs. And what you do is you call whoever manages your DHCP server, you call them and say, I'm using the static IP, and then they reserve that IP. So that means it won't assign it to what? It won't assign it to anybody automatically. Then you set up what we call a lease. Which means if your MAC address asks for a DHCP, and you've got a 10-day lease, that means you can turn your computer off for 10 days and you still get the what? You still get the same IP. If they don't give you that lease, which is what all your internet providers do, they don't lease IPs for you. So whoever your internet service provider is, so everybody's got an internet service provider. None of y'all connect directly to the internet. You go to a what? You go to an internet service provider. They have the DHCP server. They only lease so many IP addresses. So those, they lease, I mean, you can log into one time and if your computer's off, you'll log in and you'll have an IP address. You log in the next time, you got a what? You got a completely different one. So they don't lease them at all. So, they might have a million customers, but they don't lease. So that's the way the internet runs. That's the way it makes money, on leasing those IP addresses. So, and they lease the IP addresses to internet service providers, and then they have their own DHCP server. So when you go to your cable modem or however you access your internet service provider. I use Spectrum, by the way.